Hello everyone, this is Mr. Peak and this is our fourth lesson on Python programming. So this lesson we're looking at conditional loops and nested statements. So last lesson you should have looked at if statements and conditional statements, so you should have gained a little bit of experience of using variables in conditional statements. So we're going to carry on developing that knowledge this lesson by looking at what we call conditional loops or while loops. So let's take a look at what they are. So move over to my presentation. In Python programming, there's usually many different ways you can approach a problem, and some of them are more efficient than others. So for example, if I wanted to write the code to get the computer to print out the numbers 1 to 10, I could write 10 print statements and have each one saying this is line number 1, and this is line number 2, and this is line number 3. But as you can imagine, that's probably really boring to write. It'll probably take you ages. And what if you had to write to a bigger number? So imagine if I had to write to the number 100, I would have to write out this line of code 100 times. So this is where conditional loops come in. So we can use what we call while loops. So we can use what we call a while loop to start making this process much more efficient and save us time. So here you can see the amount of code I use to count to the number 20 is 20 lines of code, and here I've done it in 5. So I've done it in less than a quarter of the amount of code. So let me guide you on how we use while loops. So if I switch to create with code, and then move over to the correct project. So here we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this and walk you through how we build a while loop together. So the first thing you need to do is create a variable. And you should be used to creating variables by now because you've needed to do them every lesson for a couple of weeks. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure we name our variable appropriately, just like the rules. And I'm going to name it counter because what this variable is going to be doing is counting the numbers as we go up from 1 to 20. And then I'm going to say counter equals 1, because when we count, we always start from 1. And that's that line of code. We've now created a variable. So now what we need to do is start programming our while loop. And that just starts with the word while. And when you finished it, it should come up in that purplish colour, so the computer recognises that you are in fact using a predefined function. What you need to do then is state the name of your variable that you're going to be using as the counter. And luckily we've just named ours counter. So, counter, there we go. And then, just like last week, where I showed you that table of operators, so if I switch back to the PowerPoint for a moment, you can see here I've got my comparison operators. So in this circumstance, we're going to be using less than for our while loop. Now, depending on the while loop or what you're creating the program for, you may need to use any one of these operators, but for now, we're going to be using the less than symbol, or the crocodile as you might know them as from maths. So if I switch back to create with code, I'm going to add my crocodile, less than. So far, what this program is saying is while counter, which we know is 1, so while 1 is less than, and I want this program to count to 20. So I'm going to put in a number and I'm going to say 20. So this is saying while counter is less than 20, do something. So what I want to do now is print the value of counter so I can have that effect when the program runs of it counting from 1 to 20. So I can do that by using print, and then I'm going to call my variable. So I'm going to say counter. So what this will do is it will print the value of counter onto the console when I run the program. So what will happen now is if I press run, we have what's called an infinite loop, because at the moment, as you can see, the program is just running forever and it's printing 1. This is because at the moment we're saying while counter is less than or equal to 20, counter equals 1. Well, that's a problem because counter is always, no matter what happens in this program, going to be 1. So this statement is always going to be true, so it's going to print this forever. So we need to find a way to make sure that after this statement is printed 20 times, that the program stops. So we can do this by saying counter which is again the name of our variable, equals counter, so again we're calling that variable, plus 1. So what we're saying here is, well, counter equals 1. Well, we know that 1 plus 1 equals 2, so the new value of counter will be 2. And then when this runs through again, it will be 2. So here we go, 2 plus 1 equals 3, so the new value of counter will be 3. So as this program runs, it will go counter equals 1, while counter is less than or equal to 20, print counter, and then counter equals counter plus 1. So the new value of counter after this while loop has run once is 2. It'll run through again, less than 20, yes, print counter, counter equals plus 1, so the new value is 3, and it'll run through that process 20 times until counter equals 20. So let's run this and see what happens. Just as a quick editing side note, please do not do what I've just done with the infinite loop, because what has happened is, even though I've added this counter here, it still runs the infinite loop, so I've broken the console in Create with Code. So what I've had to do is open up a new browser and reopen Create with Code and type this code out again. So I've shown you what happens when you have an infinite loop, so please do not try this, because you will have to open up a new browser and then type out this code again. Okay, so now that I've fixed this issue, let's finally run this program and see how this while loop works. So you can see here that we count from 1 to 20. So this while loop is running 20 times, and every time it runs it adds 1 to the counter, and eventually the counter hits 20, it prints the last number 20, and the program stops. Now what we can do is we can put whatever number we like in here. So we could put, for example, 50, and this program will run 50 times, because every time it runs it just adds 1 to the counter until the value of counter is equal to 50. What we could also do is switch this around, so we could say 50 here, and say, instead of less than, because 50 is not less than, we could say greater than, which is the crocodile the other way around. So while counter is greater than or equal to 50, print this. So we'll also need to change this to a minus, because what we're doing is every time this while loop runs, we're going to minus 1 off counter, which is 50, until it reaches 1. So what we're doing is counting backwards this time instead. So you can see here we're starting at 50 and counting backwards. So this is how a really simple while loop works. So what I want you to do now is, if I switch back over to the PowerPoint, is remember this comparison operators chart is here if you need to flip back to it during the lesson to remember what each symbol means. So your first task of this lesson is to, using this while loop system, I want you to create a really simple program to start you off with while loops that counts down from 10 to 0. So remember, you need to create a variable to store the starting number, and what I've done is, if you need a little extra support, is giving you the while loop I've done that counts from 1 up to 20. So I want you to edit and change this program to count from 10 to 0. So remember, you can rewind the video and watch over my demo again if that helps, but please pause the video here and have a go at this task. Okay, so hopefully you've had a good go at that task. Please remember, if you did struggle with that or are still struggling, please just message me in the Teams chat, or at this point it's possible we'll be back in live lessons, so please just ask for help. So let's move on.